Hey everyone, it's Corey, and welcome back to Family Twist, where family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. Today's episode is one that stopped us in our tracks. Lisa's story is raw, complex, and filled with questions so many in the NPE and adoption communities wrestle with. Questions about identity, belonging, and what we're owed when it comes to the truth. In part one of this two-part conversation, Kendall and I sit down with Lisa to unravel the beginning of her journey, which was sparked by a DNA test that didn't just reveal a secret, but cracked open a whole hidden world. What happens when you uncover the truth, but the people closest to that truth shut you out? And just a heads up, this conversation gets emotional. Lisa is incredibly generous with her vulnerability, and we think a lot of you will feel seen in her words. Let's get into it. Lisa, it is lovely to have you here on the Family Twist podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So before we get into your story, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit of background information on the Voices nonprofit.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. So yes, it's officially called Voices, a BIPOC Adoptees Community. We often just refer to it as BIPOC Adoptees for short. And listeners can find us at that bipocadoptees.org or at BIPOC Adoptees on Instagram. Googling that term probably would get you to us as well.
Those links in the show notes.
Okay, awesome. And I do like to define what BIPOC means. Sometimes people don't know. So it stands for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So we're kind of a collective of adoptees who decided to come together really once. It was started by 3 Korean adoptees. They kind of realized there weren't really a lot of spaces for adoptees, period, which I think you both probably know from all the stories you've heard and from your own experience, Kendall. And we really realized too, we live in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very white place, continues to be even in the year 2025. There's a lot of history in both Washington State and in Oregon around sort of exclusionary laws and things here for Black folks, Chinese folks, like specifically written into law here. So it continues today that we have a pretty small population in terms of people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks. So we do feel very separated from one another. I think adoptees, there's millions of us in the country, but we don't know walking down the street who each other are. And then we felt like there was this additional layer of separation that was happening for us BIPOC folks too, especially out here in the Northwest, but really especially in the US. And so they just decided, hey, you know what, we know that we could use some community. We know that healing happens in community. And so they started holding essentially these storytelling events. So what they would do is reach out to other BIPOC adoptees and say, hey, would you be willing to get on stage, tell a story, and just kind of help us all heal. We see it as mutual aid. So all of us are volunteers right now. We're very grassroots. We're growing. We're trying to get some more money to be sustainable and actually pay our director and pay folks in certain positions. But up to this point, just kind of all volunteer, really doing this as mutual aid. And it was just from the first storytelling event, it was very, very, very meaningful to everybody in attendance. I got involved with the organization because I myself did a storytelling. I draw and I write. And so I just decided I'm put myself out there kind of thing. Let's do this. And I showed up, did it. And it was just really meaningful, impactful. The organizers I worked with were all super supportive and wonderful. And it's just been this really important part of my healing, which is why I got involved. But that's sort of where the organization comes at kind of mental health healing with. We know adoptees have a higher, unfortunately, rate for things like mental health disorders, suicide, incarceration, substance abuse. These are things I think all adoptees I've talked to have, if not multiple of those things, like myself, at least one, we've experienced depression, anxiety, whatever. So we just realized that no one else was coming to save us, for one thing. A lot of times the narrative around adoption is so positive. Most people look at us when I say, hey, I'm here to fundraise or do whatever for this group. They're like, so what? You're you got your family. What's the problem? They kind of see it as like we've already been given the reward of, being taken into this family. So a lot of people don't even see us as a marginalized group that needs help, adoptees or BIPOC adoptees. So I think we just kind of came to that conclusion. We need to help each other. We need to make our own kind of places and healing spaces. And so that's kind of where it all came from. And so now this is kind of our second year of full CO13 status operation. We're about to this summer have our second annual BIPOC Adoptees Conference. So it's about a 300 person conference. It's BIPOC adoptees only. We put it on last year. It's in Portland, Oregon, and it was really successful. We sold out. All of our events are free to our community, so there are no barriers for being able to access them, which also adds to our funding. We have a lot of growth to do, but we have been putting on events. We do a couple events every year for the wider community as well. So we are really trying to also educate the wider community about adoptee issues and creating those allies. I feel like what a podcast like this does is getting our stories out there, making sure people understand from our voices what we're going through so that we can build that kind of empathy and knowledge in the population. So yeah, that's what our organization is about. Thank you for letting me go on about that. It's very important work to me.
Well, and I think it's an important point to make because I grew up as a white kid around all other white people, and the adoptees that I knew were white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I didn't understand the extra layer of complexity that comes into play when people are BIPOC. You know what I mean? And I think about the one kid that I knew growing up who was a person of color but had been adopted by white parents. And it was only by talking to him when I was in middle school or whatever that I understood like that was even more challenging, right? And so that was eye-opening for me, being this little naive kid. So this is so needed, your work.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Lisa, I appreciate you bringing up the misunderstanding that a lot of people still have about adoptees and, oh, you should be thrilled, you were saved, you're not an orphan. All of that. Going back 7 years, there was a lot of misunderstanding from us because Kendall had such an amazing experience as an adoptee. And until we started becoming part of the community and started doing this podcast, that he realized that, oh yeah, there is still wound there. Just because it was a wonderful experience doesn't mean that there's not going to be wound or healing needed. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, agreed.
So can we talk a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I'm a transracial adoptee, meaning that, like the kid you were talking about from your school, I was raised by a white family. I am biracial, so my biological mother is white. My biological father is Black. When I was young, I didn't know why I had been placed for adoption, but I've always known I was adopted. My parents couldn't obviously hide it from me. I don't have the same skin color as them. It's like I had to know. I also have an adopted brother who is biracial Black as well. We are not genetically related, but we're both adopted into the same family. So I did have Black person in the family, which was cool. I didn't really see it that way at the time, but thinking back on it now, I do feel some gratitude for having at least someone else in the household that I could share some what felt like Black cultural things with, to a point. Our kind of misguided, I think, often attempts at it, but still, we had each other. So we were raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I actually was born there. It's slightly unusual to be born and raised in the same town. If you're adopted, this is like late 70s. I was born in 1979. My biological mother was sent to like a home for unwed mothers. So she was from Omaha, Nebraska, sent to this home for unwed mothers. That's why I ended up just being adopted out in the city. It was supposed to be through Catholic Social Services. For some reason, though, I went into foster care instead, and then eventually was adopted by my family that I grew up with. My biological mother was sent back to Nebraska, so it was like not a concern that we'd like run into each other or whatever. So I think early on, since I knew I was adopted, I understood pretty quickly, and I don't really know how. I definitely realize I'm, like I hear from a lot of adoptees, someone who's very good at dissociating. So I have spent a lot of time trying to go back to remember certain circumstances that happened that caused me to, kind of realize certain things. But I had an understanding of just racial dynamics, and that I definitely understood that I think I must have learned something about enslavement or the history of the U.S. Somewhere in there, I got it in my head that I understood this kind of racial hierarchy. My family didn't talk about it, maybe a little bit later on in life, but I just had this inherent understanding. So I do think that's something that when a lot of adoptive parents who are white might say like, oh, this is a complicated thing to discuss, I know I inherently knew some of this stuff from very early on. So it was probably more challenging to not have it be discussed. Kids are a lot more adept at understanding and picking up on cues, I think, than we give them credit for often. Uh, so yeah, that was something that I'm still kind of trying to figure out. But anyway, born and raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I had a father who was definitely very assimilalist. He would just encourage us to be the best at sports, be the best at, education, assimilate, like don't cause any problems. He thought that was the way to sort of our acceptance. He was very, I think, aware that we would be treated differently, my brother and I, but thought that was the solution. My mom went a little bit the other direction. She was supportive of us learning about things like Black history. She was an educator, a teacher my whole life. So she brought me to the library all the time. I'm a library worker now. I love the library. I read a ton. She introduced me to reading. She made a big deal about Black History Month at school every year for her students. She like hung a poster of Malcolm X in our house. We never talked about him, I like to laugh about and point out, but she did hang the poster up. So I like knew who he was and could
Wow.
go to the library.
Hey,
Yeah, I mean, some kids got nothing. So I very much
yeah.
thinking back now and, hearing stories from other helps put just my youth into perspective in different ways. But kind of as soon as I could, I knew I wanted to leave Wyoming. I feel a deep sense of like ownership to Wyoming. I have no other feeling of ownership over anything else. So I think that's why I have this feeling about it. I would never live there again. I don't visit there. My parents are both passed away, but I do have like this fond place for it. But I was, as soon as I could, kind of moved away. Because I grew up in Wyoming, I mistakenly came to the Northwest thinking this would be like much more diverse, which it is not. I mean,
Right.
it's more diverse, but not much more diverse. But I
Yep.
do love living here. So I have pretty much stayed here for the last 20 some years now. I've been in the Pacific Northwest. I briefly lived in North Idaho for a year, which was a wild ride. My mom lived up there and I moved up there for a bit, which turned out to be great because she actually passed away right after that year that we lived up there. So I had to get to spend some more time with her. But generally,
Sure, no.
I am in Reunion. I can talk about that a bit if you'd like.
That's what
whatever else kind of interesting. Yeah, Reunion. So what happened is, as I was getting older, getting closer and closer to 40, I did decide I wanted to maybe learn something about my at least medical history. I had decided to do 23andMe. It was a little bit more medical kind of related at the time. Like it would, check you for breast cancer genes and et cetera. So I did that. Nothing really came from it. I did match me with some people, but I reached out to one, but it didn't really go anywhere. And mostly I just was like, great, I don't have any of these genes. Eventually I read a couple books, got me like kind of going on this. And I think this has happened to a lot of people I've talked to, but so Nicole Chung's book came out, All You Could Ever Know. Is that the title? I always mess up the title, but anyway, she wrote a book about being in Reunion. I'm not sure if you've read her book, but so good. Rebecca Carroll wrote a book, Surviving the White Gaze. And Susan Devan Harness wrote a book called Bitterroot. And they all came out in the same-ish time frame. I actually tried to read Susan's book first, and it was like too hard for me to read. It's a kind of a tough read. And so I read Nicole Chung's instead. And so it kind of inspired me to like, oh, maybe I should reach out to the Catholic Social Services. They still had an involvement in my adoption. So I thought maybe they'd have some kind of information. They didn't really, except that they told me what I'm going to say was scandalous. And this woman legit called me and was like, okay, let me tell you. So she said that all she could tell me was that my biological mother had said she didn't know if I was the product of 3 different men. That was what she had said. And so this woman had found this scandalous, called me to tell me this. And I was like, oh, okay. So this actually kind of got me interested because I was like, ooh, scandalous. I called my mom and my mom claimed that she had known this my whole life. And I'm like, why didn't you ever tell me? Like, this is interesting information that you've failed to tell me. My mom was a little kooky. So sometimes I don't know that she really knew this. Sometimes my mom was a
Yeah.
little kooky about. Anyway, so I proceed to reach out to a woman on 23andMe. She was like, hey, you know what? I don't know anything about this, but I'm gonna figure it out. And I was like, okay, great, thank you. So this woman, who it turns out is, I guess maybe she's my biological mother's cousin. So I don't know what that makes her to me, but like a second cousin, I don't know. Anyway, she reached out to an auntie of mine. My biological mother is from a big Catholic family. This auntie of mine is the oldest, and so she was like, oh, I know exactly who this person is. I know the story, et cetera, et cetera. So we got in touch, me and this woman, and she sort of was able to unfold for me a lot of the story, including confirming for me, which I already felt in my soul, but confirmed for me that I had been relinquished because was not going to be white, which has led me on a lot of just interesting research, but also just talking to other biracial adoptees and realizing how prevalent it was from the 50s through the 80s to relinquish biracial kids globally. And
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what a place in history I was kind of taking part in, which is both interesting but also like fucked up, basically, for lack of a better term. Anyway, that was kind of an interesting thing to find out and confirm for me. It's led to me being very angry with her family. I don't talk to them anymore. I have cut them off. My biological mother didn't want to talk to me anyway, so that was never an issue. But this auntie of mine really wanted to keep in touch with me. I found out that, I was relinquished because I was not going to be white. But the same year that I was born, like within the same time frame, my own grandmother had a child. So I have an uncle, Philip, who's like my same age. And then this auntie who I was talking to, she was also pregnant, had a child that same year. So they had 3 children born in their family, and I'm the only one they got rid of, which just made me like so angry. To this day, I'm so angry about it. I can't. I know it's something I'll have to like work through at some point, but I'm just like angry about it. So I don't talk to them. I just find them to be like racist jerks, basically. So um, now my biological father doesn't want to have anything to do with me either. But by knowing his name, I was able to find out that he had 2 brothers and a sister. And I have since now been in contact with and spent time with their kids. So, like, my generation of folks, I have multiple cousins. 3 of them grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is near where I live now. I live in Vancouver, Washington. I lived in Portland for a long time, and these women all grew up here. A couple of them live in Florida, but anyway, I've been in contact with and spent time with, like I said, these cousins here, which has been really cool. They've been just so welcoming. Like, they didn't take even a beat to welcome me into their lives. They had no problem doing that. My biological father, they don't really know very well. He's not super connected to the family. So they were like, we don't even know. They're like, at this point, they're like, we've met you more than we've ever met your biological dad. Like, this guy is just not, he's like out in the wind. Um, I've also found out I have, from my biological father, at least 3 other siblings that I've learned of, and my biological mother has 1 child. So I do have multiple siblings that I'm learning about. Um, it's harder for me for whatever reason. I think I could probably get into the psychology of this, but it's harder for me to kind of accept or interact with my siblings versus none of them are adopted. I have a harder time kind of interacting with my siblings. One of them is a woman, my sister. She and I talk the most. She has a child. I've seen pictures of her daughter, and we talk a little bit. I don't know where that's going to go, but my cousins here, I feel the most like close with, and one in particular, we spend quite a bit of time together and have really integrated into each other's lives. I spent
Great.
Christmas this year with them and things like that. So yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, I feel fortunate to feel close to, 3 of my siblings, but the other 3, not so much. So,
Mhm.
it is what it is, and no judgments. Everybody's situations were different. And, I thought I would really connect a lot. So my dad got my mother pregnant and then quickly got a second. And I was about to say woman, but they were girls. My brother Todd was also given up for adoption. So
Oh,
I thought he and I could really
yeah.
bond over that. But we did, but we don't talk about it a lot. But he's
Yeah,
a
that
great
is
guy. I
interesting.
haven't gotten to talk to him as much about that as I want to.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to your cousins, sending out the love to them. And I think that's something that we really didn't think about too much before we started this podcast, but we've had lots of stories about how the cousins are like, no judgment, your family, I'm so, and, I think as we get to, I'm the oldest kid. And so I wasn't super close with my cousins growing up just because I was a bit older, but once you become an adult, I think it's important that we continue to embrace these relationships, and definitely the cousins on my mom's side, we try to get together when we can. My cousin Sean, who was living here, with his fiance for a while, and we got super, super close. I mean, yeah. And so anyway, all love to the cousins.
Yes, that's very cool. Yeah, I agree. And the cousins have just been, even some of farther out sort of second cousins have reached out to be like, what can we help find out? And just instantly like, hey cousin, what can we do? And I'm like, oh,
I know.
very nice.
It is nice.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that you mentioned, I want to go back to. First off, thank you for continuing the library arts. It's so important, especially today. Shout out for you there. There's a lot of things that are going on that make these troubling times, but definitely like book banning and all that is just ridiculous. So thank you for the field.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And as a writer and an illustrator, are you using your journey as sort of an experience for writing and your art?
Thank you for that question. First, I will say about libraries, agreed. So important, I think, just for everyone. But I do think about myself as a child wanting access to information that I would have otherwise not had access to. I hear that from a lot of adoptees, including stuff like people talking about going to the library to see if maybe they can use a phone book. I think even in you've talked about that, Glenn, in an episode, but I used to do that kind of stuff too. And I didn't even know what I was looking for, honestly, but just being able to have access to things like that. And libraries offer that, as well as now things like internet and laptops sometimes, or we used to offer like hotspot device. There's just a lot libraries offer that I think people don't even understand. Folks that, we serve, they come in there for help with things like internet, help with typing up, printing a resume. It's like these services beyond books, which are also so important. Information's important, but it's coming from so many different places now that you can access through library. That's awesome. And I want to shout out here in Southwest Washington, Oregon, there's a library specifically for adoptees and former foster youth. It's called the Oregon Post-Adoption Resource Center. And they have many resources, and it's a broader thing besides just the library. But within that resource center, they have a library that contains all manner of books around both identity, emotion, so not just adoptee experiences, but just things you might want to talk through with your kids or adults or young folks about identity, adoption. And what's cool is they have an e-library, but they also will mail books around the state and to Southwest Washington to get to folks who need to get to it. So a lot of people live too far from a library, let's say, or things like that. So yeah, it's a cool service that they offer that I feel like would be neat to see on like a national level or something.
Nope. Absolutely.
Who knows with today's, climate.
Right. Yeah. If you could talk a little bit about your art, that's what's always, we actually interviewed someone yesterday in Australia who has poems and actually started writing songs about his experience.
Oh, cool.
And which is just, I love hearing how people's journeys inspire their art.
Focus most of my art and writing, I'd say, on my experience as an adoptee. When I was a kid, I loved to draw. I loved coloring. I just loved that kind of stuff. I really feel like it was kind of this part of like blueprint of who I should be. I didn't see it as valuable to my father, so I moved away from it and got much more into sports and academics, and originally wanted to go to school for art, but then ended up being like, oh, okay, Dad's not going to like that. So went to school for science, pushing away. The pandemic happened. I have no job. We're quarantined. And I love to send mail to people. And I just started drawing postcards and sending them to people. And it kind of started with me doing that just as a reminder that I was like, oh, wow, I used to draw and I like doing this. I had all these hours to spend sending postcards, and it was fun to brighten someone's day. I kind of started there, and then I started doing these postcards. I called them postcards for justice. So I drew these political cartoons and I was selling them, raising money for anti-racist educators and encouraging people to mail them to police departments and your representatives and your mayors and whoever. Just advocate for Black folks' social issues kind of stuff. Um, that was the first time I thought that could see myself using art. I could see art in a way outside of just something to look at. I didn't really think about art like protest art now or like political cartoons. So it kind of like awoke something in me. Now I have sort of this online persona, is the best way I could describe it, as the adoptee clown, is what I call myself. And I have a little character that I have of myself that I kind of drew around, like more so I looked as a child. So I kind of use this online Substack that I have as like a diary. So I call it a diary really because I'm thinking about what I'm writing, but it's very much about things that I'm going through or thinking about, which is why I call it a diary. It's not super polished. It's not, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just realized I do this, or I just realized, because I have only been in therapy really for the last 3 years. So I'm very much an out of the fog, they call what sometimes adoptees go through, not really realizing maybe all the ways their adoptions have impacted them. That was certainly true for me. I was very much like, I'm all good. I was adopted, whatever. However, I was desperately sad, anxious, depressed my whole life. I finally reached a point where I really was like, I'm sick of like hating myself and hating my brain and hating life. This is not living. That I was like, there's more to all of this. I was trying to kind of unpack being raised by white folks, but then it kind of just kept getting deeper and deeper into like my adoption and transracial adoption, which are to me kind of two almost different things, but that intersect. So anyway, a lot of my writing really did start with like journaling and therapy. And then I started putting that on Substack. I didn't even tell anyone about it except my husband. I was like, you can read this, but I'm not telling anyone else about this. And I was really just using it as like a diary until I met the BIPOC Adoptees organization and really started sharing. And even then in these really safe adoptee only spaces, that I finally was like, all right, I'm going to actually publish this. I like let my sister and brother know that I was like writing this stuff. My parents were already passed away, so I didn't like warn them, but I warned some of my like aunties and stuff. I have a big family, extended family on my dad's side. I feel very complicated about how I feel about them now. With my parents gone, I feel very much like that's their family, like not mine anymore.
That's where we're going to leave things for now. Lisa's story is far from over, and in part 2, we dive deeper into the fallout, the boundaries she's had to set, and how she's finding her way forward despite the rejection. These stories, they're never clean, but they're real, and sharing them is how we take back our power piece by piece. If Lisa's words resonated with you, we hope you'll come back for the next chapter. Until then, this is Family Twist, and remember, family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. The Family Twist podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage